What's going on Instagram, YouTube, Pornhub, or whatever? Today we're going to talk about macronutrient ranges, why and how you should appropriately implement them into your diet, because I think it is quite unrealistic for someone who is not competitive, and even for competitors. But I'm not a competitor, so don't get all butthurt because a non-competitor is talking about competitive things. Someone in a competitive or non-competitive realm to stick to something so rigid for an extended period of time. I think with an increase in flexibility and auto-regulatory sort of properties with diet and of course training, there is an increase in adherence. And adherence predicts success, and we're all about success and not just shit. So today, what we're going to talk about is how you can better utilize ranges in order to Homer Simpson your shit up. No, probably not. But in order to stick to something for a longer time. I just explained everything there by accident that I noted. So well done to me, pat myself on the back. With a decrease in calories, there is a decreased range, and with an increase in calories, there is an increased range. What this means is that the more you eat, let's say different phases of your training, whether it be massing / bulking or cutting / dieting, the less you have to worry about your calories or your macronutrient ranges, and the less you eat, the more you have to worry about your calories and macronutrient ranges. That's why there is a decrease or increase in the range depending on how many calories you're consuming. So eating less means less range, eating more means more range. Let's talk about, we're going to split it up. So I've gone like, this is all during bulking or massing because it sounds smarter, and I want to sound as smart as I can for YouTube, because YouTube or Instagram is really all that matters in life. And then I've gone ahead and got lazy, and I just called it dieting and protein, carbs, and fat. So we're going to start with protein. So protein, this is going to get misinterpreted, but protein isn't as important when you are on a bulk, quote unquote, because there are a bunch of other nutrients out there that are protein sparing, and calories are just protein sparing in general. So I just like to recommend the Broseph 2 grams per kilogram per day. You can go even lower, and you can go with the AIS recommendations for newly trained and habituated athletes to resistance training, which is 1.7 or 1.5 to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day. If you're a female, you need to consume 1.5 to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day, plus 10% according to the Australian Institute of Sport. They're a fantastic resource to use if you're into evidence-based nutrition. Of course they are. They're the Institute of Sport. If you notice how no bro science or batshit crap comes out of the Institute of Sport, that's because they're super smart and some of the leaders in research and exercise prescription and nutrition science in the freaking world. So look them up. Tip-top stuff from Australia. I like to say with protein we go 10 grams each way. That's because protein, like, you should have a little bit of flexibility, but it's not going to matter too much, especially when you're on the bulk, which is the most important part of your life. Carbs for massing just form the remainder of your calories, which we've talked about in previous videos. This is quite high during your bulk, and it's not going to make you fat, so don't freak out. And I've got it there for performance. That's not a word. For performance. I like a range of 10 to 15 grams a day. And this is because, again, when you're massing, it's not too much of a big deal. You want to, and when I say range, I mean each way. I'd prefer you be on the other end because we're trying to grow and we're using carbohydrates as a means to increase calories and improve performance as a vehicle to promote hypertrophy. There is nothing super special about increasing your carbohydrate intake other than that. Of course, yes, everything I've just mentioned is what I'm talking about, of course, because I mentioned it. Fat, when you are massing, fat usually forms half to 1 gram of fat per day. That makes no sense. 1 gram per kilogram of fat per day. You wouldn't want it down at the half end. I'm not a big fan of that, especially during a massing phase. You know how many carbohydrates you would have to eat to form the remainder of your calories. And if you're into that and just consuming very low fat, high carbohydrate alternatives to your eating, then that's okay, and I'm going to recommend against it, but whatever. There are some hypotheses about you will become more insulin sensitive and gain more fat because of you consuming more carbohydrates, but then the insulin hypothesis has become redundant at best in the research. And then there's the other stuff about how consuming more fat, it's a little bit easier for that fat to become fat. But this stuff is a little bit too minute for me to give a shit about, and at the end of the day, what I really want you to do is focus on adherence, because that predicts success, and that's what we're all about. So I suggest you consume a little bit higher fat, definitely not half a gram. I probably wouldn't go lower than 0.8 grams per kilogram per day for convenience sake. And who doesn't like eating peanut butter by the freaking spoonful? And if you don't, you should probably just turn off the video right now, because I don't want to surround myself with negative people like you. I'm joking. Watch the video and shut up. All right, so this is awful. We're going to go with a range of 5 grams both ways, and that's because fat is a little more calorie dense. It is a bulking sort of phase, and you are going to gain a little bit of chubbiness, but that's okay. Don't freak out, because we're going to use the dieting/cutting phase, where we can clean it up with some mini cuts. I don't know, it's all the sort of physique stuff that a lot of people talk about. In all honesty, I never do mini cuts, and I actually think that you should spend the majority of your time gaining size, especially if you're a recreational lifter who just wants to be jacked. Because at the end of the day, what is the point of bulking for like 4 bloody weeks? You stuffed it up, you got too fat in 4 weeks, and all of a sudden you're like, shit, better do a mini cut. Now, this is going to get very misinterpreted again, but the muscle hasn't had really time to set in place. That sounds so bro-y, but I have seen some very intelligent people post about that, and you sort of need to give your neurophysiological self some time to adapt and not just sort of rush around with these unfocused goals. That's a good way to spin your wheels and not a very good way to make progress long term. So try to stick to one of these phases long term and not just beat around the bush. Let's talk about dieting now, because dieting is all the rage, because it's summer and you probably want a 6-pack, but I'm here to tell you that getting a 6-pack is very difficult. No, I'm not, because I've already filmed a video about that, and you can find it in my YouTube channel or my Instagram. I don't know what you can find it in, but it's there somewhere. What's that? Someone leave a comment in the comment section below about what that is, and if you say the right answer, you're wrong. Give me all wrong answers, and I want hilarious ones. When you're dieting, there is an increased, can I use the word reliance? Oh, nah. There's an increased importance for protein intake, and I like a range of under 5 grams a day each way. And that's because there's an increased importance for protein intake for muscle preservation properties. I do like to decrease the amount of carbohydrates I consume during a cut, not because carbs make you fat, but because there is no sort of physiological reason other than like cognition and performance. So I like to decrease my calories of course I like to decrease my calories during a fat loss phase, but I like to decrease my calories from carbohydrates for that very reason, because I don't want to screw around with this and this. You can't really sit too low for too long, because you'll half-mast 24/7, and who wants that? I like a range for my carbohydrates of 10 grams each way per day. That means if your macronutrient calculation has come out to 280 grams of carbohydrates, you go to 290 or you go to 270. And that is because these two here, the reason they're a little bit less, or the reason that's more, is just because of flexibility, and I sort of want people to stick to things. But it's because fat is has the highest energy per calorie per gram. Fat at 9 calories per gram, and protein and carbs at 4 calories per gram. So fat should be no less than 30% of total calories, and when I say no less, I mean you get your total calories and you times it by 0.3, and then you get that number and you divide it by 9, and that should give you your fat intake. That's very low, and I wouldn't recommend sticking with that for a very long time. I recommend 2 to 3 grams per day per way in terms of where you want your fat. And that's because, like I said, fat is 9 calories per gram. And the more you screw around with your fat intake, the more you skew your caloric intake each way, thus potentially inhibiting fat loss to a certain degree. Watch this. How depressing is that? This is how I would set up macronutrient ranges. Credit to a lot of other exercise professionals out there who have actually come up with far superior macronutrient ranges to this, especially during competition. And when I say credit to those people, I'm talking about guys like anyone from 3DMJ, Alan Aragon, Lyle McDonald, Lane Norton does talk about this, Mike Rizzutel. All those blokes are far superior and smarter than me. So if you need more information on this, I'm sure you can look them up, and I'm sure they've discussed similar things. But this is meant to apply to the general fitness population and not to competitors. So if you get butthurt because you're a competitor, and I talked about things that you perceive to be competitive, that's okay. I don't care, because it's the internet, and who cares? Thank you very much for your time. Speak to you in the next one. TTFN to Ta for now, and make sure you don't do drugs.